All right, everyone, let's get the show started. Welcome to DevOps Office Hours. It's May 27th, 2020. My name is Eric Osterman, and I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse, and we're a DevOps accelerator. That means that we help companies own their infrastructure in record time by building it with you and then showing you the ropes. If that sounds interesting, head over to cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. Again, that's cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. For those of you new to the call, the format is very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered. So feel free to unmute yourself at any time if you want to jump in and participate. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/office hours. We host these calls every week. We'll automatically post a video recording of this session to the Office Hours Slack channel, as well as follow up with an email that you can share with your team. With that said, let's get this started. So a few quick announcements that came up over the past week. Excuse my Slack buzzing there in the background. I got to mute that. One of the ones that I'm really excited about, since this is a Terraform and Kubernetes-centric community, is that there's an alpha available now for a brand new Kubernetes provider. Sounds like it was redone from the ground up to support any Kubernetes primitive, basically the CRDs, to provision resources. That means that Terraform is edging closer to becoming a viable replacement to something like Helm. So using Terraform modules, you could now encapsulate anything that is described in terms of a Helm chart and deploy that in a way that more seamlessly integrates together with your infrastructure. Some of you might be using the Helm Terraform provider for Kubernetes today, and that's nice in the sense that it shows you a diff of the values that are going to change, but it doesn't show you a diff of what the resources are going to, how the resources are going to be modified. So a simple one-line change might accidentally drop that database that you depend on in that Helm chart. So this is why I think this Kubernetes provider is really exciting. Anybody want to add some context to this announcement? I think, Andrew, you were the one that shared it with the community first yesterday.
Kelsey Hightower's Twitter is a goldmine.
It is. It is. Yeah. So this was, so I guess Kelsey Hightower's working on a demo related to some other really cool deployment tool for Kubernetes. And he's using Terraform to deploy that and hopefully using this new alpha provider.
Conceptually, provisioning Kubernetes resources using Terraform doesn't sound that bad to me. It's just kind of on a different plane as like infrastructure. But for some things, it makes a lot of sense to me, like, you know, administrative level stuff inside Kubernetes, like admissions controllers, or, you know, all that stuff. I don't know if I would ever use it for like deploying applications that I want to have, you know, keep updated, and I want to use GitOps or something. You know, I think there's better tools out there for something like that. But, you know, if I'm going to throw in, you know, an Istio gateway and an admissions controller and things that I'm going to put in and never touch again.
Yeah, this kind of
I think Terraform's a good way.
Yeah.
I mean, right now what we're doing is what? kubectl apply this big-ass YAML file, right? I mean, it's not a whole lot different than that. But it's, you know, wrapped nicer.
Yeah.
My question is, there's a stigma around Terraform provisioning Kubernetes resources not being good at holding state and stuff. Is that just with the Helm provider, or is it anything Kubernetes?
Well, I don't know if it's not holding state or not. It does a really good job of that. Let's take a step back. Let's ignore Kubernetes for a second and just think about ECS. And that's where a lot of people learn to kick the tires with the concept of a container management platform. So the equivalent of like a pod spec, you could say in ECS would be a task definition. And it's been a pain in the butt for most people, I think, using Terraform as the deployment primitive for ECS to update those task definitions. That's why tools like ECS deploy exist, where you can just bump the parts of the task definition that you want, and it's a better example. It's also a big criticism I've had of using ECS with Terraform, is because I hate that so much. And here I am, I feel like a hypocrite then being excited about using Terraform with Kubernetes resources than to deploy things in Kubernetes land. So I think what I don't like personally with Terraform and CICD is the whole state management story, that it's complicated. And I think if one's using Terraform Cloud, on the other hand, together with this, then I think a lot of my qualms just go away, that it gets a lot more streamlined and easier. It just works. You don't, state management is an afterthought, or is just a foregone conclusion rather.
I have never once had a problem with an S3 backend with a DynamoDB locking table.
No,
like it's worked perfectly 100 times out of 100.
Yeah, it's just that getting your CI/CD pipeline set up with the IAM roles and all of that stuff, depending on what your choice of CI/CD pipeline is, a little bit more cumbersome.
I got you.
Now suddenly you're setting up some AWS credentials inside of like CodeFresh or something like that, and then those need to get rotated. So basically, I would just like to have a simpler interaction with Kubernetes. And if you're using something like CodeFresh, which has a built-in integration for Kubernetes, it's so trivial to deploy to Kubernetes. Versus now, if we're going to be using Terraform in CodeFresh to deploy to Kubernetes, we're taking a step back before we're taking a step forward.
I mean, it definitely feels like something that is cool, but not something brand new and exciting. Like,
yeah.
Like, being able to provision Kubernetes resources using, configuration as code has been around for years.
Yeah.
Right. Whether it's the as simple as possible, just running kubectl apply, whether it's using customize, whether it's using Helm, there's lots of different options out there that have been around for a really long time. So, when I look at this going, would I use this? Maybe, so what I do see as a cool thing for this to be is, if I want to create a Terraform module that is a turnkey production-ready cluster, this is necessary, because you need to put in the cert manager CRDs, and you need to do Istio, and you need to configure Istio, and whatever. And so this is something that adds a lot of value to something like that, where when I run Terraform apply, I've gone from a completely empty AWS instance to a Kubernetes cluster ready to go to run in production with one Terraform apply. That's really powerful to me.
But there still will be a lot of configuration transfer to make something like that work. So even if you look at Istio, they've moved away from Helm for deployments to generating this huge manifest based on different profiles of Istio deployments that you'd be doing, that would be a monster to implement in Terraform, is all I'm saying. So I don't know. It's cool that it's addressing the CRD concerns, though. That was something that just literally came up in a conversation. So
yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to just dive in.
No.
Yeah, and it's something that the old, I guess, can't really call it old yet, because this new one's still in alpha. Like, nobody's going to be using it for a while, in any kind of serious manner.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not really sure about
I
that.
guess the same people that won't be using Terraform because it's 0.
Because it's beta. Yeah.
Alpha's
the new beta, and beta's the new GA. Good Lord. Speaking of CodeFresh, I am finally officially involved in a POC of CodeFresh, so I'm very excited about.
Oh, cool. At your day job?
Yep.
Nice. And are you guys going to be evaluating the on-prem set up, or?
Yeah, we'll have to at some point, because
Cool.
we have government customers that are like, completely air gapped.
That reminds me, something else I'd also promised to do is that CodeFresh also has started doing their office hours. So anybody who is a CodeFresh customer, I know there's a few on the call. I guess their office hours isn't as SEO'd yet. I'll find and share a link if I can't find the CodeFresh office hours, because ours shows up first. All right. But yeah, it's a chance to directly ask questions to CodeFresh. Another cool thing I heard coming out of CodeFresh is the ability to manage secrets with whatever credential store you want to do. So those secrets now aren't in CodeFresh. So you can use Vault as your credential store for CodeFresh. I think that'll be a pretty big differentiator in CodeFresh compared to other CICD platforms.
What's the main differentiator for CodeFresh for you guys? Like, why did Cloud Posse, or Andrew, why are you guys investigating it? Why does it differentiate from other CI/CD platforms?
Yeah, I'll take a first stab at it, and then I'd like to hear Andrew's. The first thing is that when we started using CodeFresh, this is now going back a couple of years, and then the mature options for Kubernetes just weren't there yet. CodeFresh being born in more or less the container Kubernetes era, it treated containers as a first-class citizen. Circle CI eventually caught up and did that, but they were not container native from the beginning. Defining pipelines in CodeFresh, they tended to be a lot more terse in the beginning compared to something like a Circle CI. Then on the UI side, it presented a lot of the stuff that we like to present to like the release engineering or the QA teams, so that they, at a glance, you get everything you need inside a CodeFresh for doing that. I also like, as a professional services company, the fact that there are 3 modes of operating. One is as a full SaaS platform, so it checks off that box for the companies that are okay with that and don't need to do it. For the companies that are okay with the SaaS, but they need to have the runners and stuff in their environment for compliance, supports that. They call it their hybrid mode. And lastly, it also supports like the full enterprise on-prem setup for that. So it provides support. So like when you're using an open source CI/CD tool or platform, the support you can get for that could be limited. Obviously, some of these platforms, like Spinnaker, companies like Armory have spun up around them to provide support, but that's not true for all the tools out there. And that's why I've really liked CodeFresh. Andrew?
So I'm coming from a platform of Jenkins running on Kubernetes. And there's a lot of jankiness. So, when we were looking at options that are, as Kubernetes centric and native as could be, CodeFresh stood out. And then the licensing model, to be, completely honest, was a big factor. CodeFresh's licensing model is by concurrent pipelines rather than by user. So like when we talk to like CloudBees for their enterprise offering, which is called CloudBees Core, it's licensed per user. So if we have 2,500 developers in the company and we want to give all of them, let them all dip their toe in the water, but and do their own little POCs and stuff for this enormous migration from Jenkins to CodeFresh, or Jenkins to whatever new is coming, then the licensing model is much better. I don't think we'll ever completely get rid of Jenkins, but we want to provide more state-of-the-art tools, which Jenkins, I don't think anyone other than CloudBees will purport that Jenkins is really state-of-the-art.
Yeah.
Those all seem like good, legit reasons. Is the jankiness that you're experiencing with Jenkins, that's a weird thing to say, is that like the Docker and Docker issue, or is it just you have a million different use cases with a company or with an organization of 2,500 people, and there's just a lot of different ways that people use it, and it causes all sorts of issues.
I think that's for you.
Yeah. To get Jenkins as a Kubernetes native platform, you need to use the Kubernetes plugin. So it's like, you can't just use the tool, you have to use the tool plus a plugin. And the plugin is maintained by other people, and there's, and so we've had, we could probably solve a lot of the issues given enough time spent on it, but that's kind of what we're looking to avoid, right? It's like, we don't want to build out everything under the sun. We just want it to kind of work, and I've spent literally a year, working on getting Jenkins to the point where we can kind of support what we want to do with it, and that's we've been able to do it all with, configuration as code and, all of that. So that's all good stuff, and especially for a free offering, nothing really matches Jenkins. If you're talking free, right? I mean, Jenkins takes the cake. Yeah. Well, okay. So the deal with, and Eric's absolutely right. Free meaning dollars spent, right? Not labor costs or anything. But when you have charge numbers for everything you do, and people auditing those charge numbers, the labor ends up being a lot easier to get through than any kind of dollars you spent on licensing and stuff. Like, there's 3 different levels of authorizations I need to get before I actually buy a license for frickin' IntelliJ, right? I mean, for a whole CICD platform, holy crap.
Yeah. So that's true. And I think that's a big reason, actually, why tools like Jenkins end up succeeding, is because from an engineering perspective, there's a whole lot less red tape to get it through.
Gotcha. That was good. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, cool. Let's see here. So actually, kind of apropos follow up to that, I forget who it was in the community, posted a link to a Terraform module that they just developed. I thought it sounded pretty neat. What this is doing is running GitHub runners in your own account on spot instances. So if anyone is kicking around GitHub Actions, and I meant to say GitHub Actions runners for using spot instances. So if anybody's kicking the tires on that, you might want to have a look at that link. The other thing was our very own Zach posted a pretty interesting POC that he did, which is running local stack, which for those not using AWS is a way to emulate a lot of the AWS services locally, like under Docker Compose. But I thought this was a really interesting idea. So Zach's point was to do it in kind, so like Kubernetes and Docker. But I see another very practical use case for this, and that's when you're running preview environments on Kubernetes and you want to like open that environment up for every pull request. You don't want to spin up a Dynamo database or Elasticache Redis or all these things for every pull request. So instead, if you just use something like local stack in that environment, you can mock a lot of that AWS functionality, perhaps, to just edge your integration testing a little bit closer in those preview environments to the real thing. Zach, do you want to add anything to your experiments with this?
Yeah, I mean, it took me like 15 minutes to convert the thing using Customize and turn it into a runnable deployment. So, I mean, for me, it was just the exercise of getting it done and converting it over, considering I hadn't really seen any charts for it or anything like that. So, not that it wasn't using Customize, it was using Compose. It's an older tool that's referenced on the Kubernetes documentation.
Yeah, Compose with a K.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which is now built into kubectl.
Is it? Oh, that's cool.
Oh,
yeah, you can do Compose with kubectl now. kubectl, however you like to call it.
We're
that's
using
cool.
local stack, but we spin up individually as we need it per project. Is the idea here that you're just running one local stack in Kubernetes
Yeah. I
for
mean,
like all of
for
your
me, it was
preview
just running it
environments?
too, so I was doing some testing locally, and
Okay.
I'm running Docker, and I could have just spun it up using Docker. In fact,
Alex,
I
are
did
you
run
running local stack under Kubernetes as well for your preview environments?
In some places we are.
Cool.
For all of anything that goes into an ephemeral environment, like the preview environment you're talking about, we don't make resources for us. So they use like MinIO if they need to do S3, or they use local stack
Okay.
for a lot of the other stuff. So
That's cool.
we spin all that up dynamically in our ephemeral environments.
really cool.
And how is the
Sorry,
how,
not compose.
What was that?
I said compose was in kubectl. It's not. It's the customize.
Okay. That'd be interesting. Thanks for clearing that up.
I have a question. How is the parity between the features released by Amazon and local stat compares? In the sense of like, there's a feature you're actually doing in Terraform, then you run against local stack, and then it doesn't work because it's not implemented. What is it too far apart, or it's fairly close?
Well, it depends on what you're doing. So they have a pro version that includes far more items like Cognito and EKS and ECS and Elasticache and all sorts of other stuff. But there's like S3 and DynamoDB, Kinesis, API gateways, things like that are available in the free version. So
Here you can see. Yeah, that's a pretty
secrets management,
that's a pretty good list.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have heard about VCR before. I remember doing this before local stack existed. VCR in Ruby, you could actually record API calls. So then you have a recording, and then that recording, you can play it back. So any type of API call you do, it contacts basically this proxy that is actually proxying back the response from Amazon that you recorded previously. So you always have to have a recording of a real run for your stack. And once it's good and it's verified, then you save the recording, and then that recording becomes, you play it back to your tests, basically.
Do you have a link handy for that? Faster tests with VCR. I guess this
kind of
is
like the Selenium of API calls.
Yeah, VCR actually support. It was an idea. I don't know if it was built in for Ruby first, but then it got exported to like. Is the second is over there? You see GitHub VCR.
Oh.
I think a Terraform link. I think it is. And Python has one implementation, and some other languages. It's pretty interesting, but I think a local stack is better in that sense.
Yeah, because it's actually interactive, right? It's
exactly, yeah. Otherwise, you had to record every time, and then you had to maintain the recordings. So it becomes really tedious to get the recordings back, and every feature you had to do a recording of a real stack, and if the real stack is just a huge account, then you might actually have to dissect the recordings and put them all together. Now it becomes tedious, but yeah, but the problem is, the reason why I asked a question about the parity of the version of like DynamoDB version 1 compared with local stack DynamoDB, would it be close enough so that you don't have to actually update it all the time? That's that was I was asking.
I don't have the answer, but anybody else specifically, what's your experience been using local stack for let's downscope it to local development. How's that been, and has it been convergent enough for you?
Our company uses it in isolation per project. Like, we don't do a lot of stuff where like we queue something from one application and in local stacks SQS, and then another picks it up. We just haven't gotten that complicated with it yet. I don't see why it wouldn't work, because like the same project, if one application can queue something on a stack and then dequeue it as well, there's no reason a separate application couldn't dequeue it. So we've only used some of the more simple things like SQS, most of the SNS, things like that we've used. We've had no problems with it, but we also haven't used it like very in depth. But it's also great because you can run as a Docker container. So if you're in CodeFresh, or if you're in Jenkins, or wherever you're at, if you want to run some unit tests that actually want to use exercise the API, you can exercise it against local stack. which is kind of nice, rather than having to mock it, which, you know, have that fight with your developers. I don't care, but some developers just refuse to write mocks, and so you just throw local stack up, and it's
Well,
pretty
BCR
straightforward.
was for lazy developers so that they don't have to mock. So
Yeah,
that's
I
the
feel
same
like
thing.
for that same thing, like we don't want to write mocks because that does whatever. Fine, you can run local stack. I think that's a little bit better than I like the idea. I've always liked the idea of like recorded requests and things like that. But I think there's a time and place for both. And for most work, local stack has just worked for us.
That's great. Thanks, Alex, for the context there. So let's see. So that was the local stack announcement. One more announcement. So next week is going to be a little different. We have a guest speaker that reached out to us. His name's Chuck. Last name escapes me. And he is a CloudFormation expert. Recently has started working on a book for Manning Publications on CloudFormation. So I know this is very much a Kubernetes, Terraform centric group, but I personally have a lot of questions about using CloudFormation as one of the tools in our toolbox. So I look forward to that. So if you have any, if you're using CloudFormation today or you're curious about it, queue up your questions for next week on that in the office hours channel.
Are you folks using CloudFormation at all at Cloud Posse?
So interestingly enough, yes. I'll give one cop-out answer and one legit answer. So one cop-out answer is, yeah, you know, sometimes CloudFormation just fills in the missing glue that you need for some things. A couple of our Terraform modules have some underpinnings of CloudFormation. There's one thing we've done is like there's a nice CIS benchmarks CloudFormation by AWS Labs, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Forget where it is right now, but we've deployed this with Terraform, but it does all the heavy lifting of implementing those AWS config rules for that. But right now we're actually working on another project. And if you want to distribute an application through the AWS marketplace, that needs to be CloudFormation. So the benefit with this is if you're like an enterprise SaaS business or have some kind of a product that you want to make it easier for companies to run on-prem, which is a requirement for some major enterprises, then this is a great way to go. So it doesn't have to be as bad as it used to be. CDK, which is Amazon's cloud developer toolkit, it supports bindings to Java and Python and Node. So you can write CloudFormation in a more proper language that renders to CloudFormation JSON or YAML.
I didn't know that rendered CloudFormation under the hood.
Yeah, that's all it does under the hood. So you actually get an artifact that you can use.
Oh, that's cool.
A lot of people use CDK, but never apply any of that infrastructure. The only reason they use it is to generate CloudFormation scripts, which they then take and apply.
Yeah.
Huh.
The one thing that we learned from that the hard way was that when you use, so CDK has like two interfaces. Now, I'm not the actual one person working on this, so forgive me if I'm not calling these things the right thing. But basically, one interface is the high-level interface that gives you a really terse way of defining a stack that you want to provision. But when you do that, you can't use inputs from the user because it takes the opinionated approach that when you run the script, like the Python tool to generate the CloudFormation, that those concepts should be done at compile time. So if you want to actually take inputs from the user at runtime, like in the marketplace, you have to use all the low-level primitives, and you end up actually writing quite a lot of code to achieve the same thing. And then that's what, like, so we've gone through this now, and we're experiencing, well, you know, Terraform wasn't half bad after all. Yeah, so there's something nice and clean with Terraform, how how little you need to express by comparison.
Yeah, for sure. I think I follow the Cloudinauts guys and listen to their podcasts every once in a while, and they were obviously big CloudFormation folks, and then they're now kind of switching over to using Terraform more. But the thing that they mention over and over, and it's kind of just like they seem like sad about it because they were so focused on CloudFormation, is that they're like that they call out the times where AWS doesn't support new things within CloudFormation where it's a huge loss to like the ability for that tool to really cover everything. And that's one of the big things that's kept me away from it, is that it seems as if, if AWS isn't going to support their primary tool for doing their like infrastructure as code, it seems like it's lacking a lot.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that brought up before as well, that it's ironic that CloudFormation would sometimes lag behind what the APIs are capable of doing in Terraform. On the other side, there are things that we can't do in Terraform that you can do in CloudFormation, like rolling updates of autoscale groups. So that it's frustrating that those are on both sides.
Yeah, it's all a headache, right? It's just kind of painful one way or the other, but
yeah.
What's really interesting about CloudFormation, which is what our company uses exclusively, is if you don't use infrastructure as code, CloudFormation is very, very powerful if you're willing to go through their interface and actually spend some time and have a human resource in-house whose sole job is to just operate the AWS interface. We found some really powerful capabilities especially with auto scaling through using CloudFormation. So I just thought it might be useful to point that out.
Yeah. Oh, wait, Mark, can you explain that one more time? Oh, wait, are you saying that you're going from the UI to CloudFormation, or did I misunderstand that?
So we are an enterprise system.
Yeah.
We're running over 2,000 separate containers, and I think we have almost 800 Lambda functions.
Wow.
And we are married to AWS. And our deployments are huge.
Yeah.
And we have fully automated pipelines. Every single thing is automated for all of our deployments. And we found that CloudFormation helps us with all these automation scripts that we can write and run. And we do not use infrastructure as code. And you're
using CloudFormation though, no, right?
It's kind of counterintuitive. Because you would think that you'd want to use infrastructure as code if we use CloudFormation, but what we're using CloudFormation for is to write automation scripts for management and orchestration, rather than deploying the infrastructure itself as code. And we found it to be a really nice middle ground for making sure that things stay organized. We do use Kubernetes, we do use Rancher, so it's it really helps to get CloudFormation to sort of handle at least, it's not our whole system that's on CloudFormation. It's what we call internally our controller, which kind of does what it says on the tin. It is the controller for our enterprise system. And it handles all of the business logic and tasks and figures out what microservices need to fire up when and how and all that good stuff. So that's the piece of our infrastructure that we keep in CloudFormation.
Okay, that now I understand more. That adds a lot of context. Mark, it'd be awesome if you can join us next week if you're available.
I'm here every week pretty much. Sometimes I'm just usually muted with my camera off.
All right, cool. Well, that's going to be great.
Yeah.
Sorry, was there something else to add to that?
No, I was just saying I'm looking forward to it. Looking forward to hearing from the expert.
All right. So let's leave some material for next week's call on CloudFormation. So I'm going to skip on to the next talking point here now. So this was something that was brought up 1 or 2 weeks ago in office hours as a suggested topic, and we didn't have enough context at that time to answer it, but now we do, and I think it's a really good suggestion. So Andre brought up this point here that he saw come up. So ThoughtWorks is a very reputable company. They put out this thing called the Technology Radar with their observations on what's happening, all things cloud, all things container, best practices, etc. And then they rank these into quadrants like adopt, hold, evaluate, and I don't know what the other one is. So and they do a lot of engineering and consulting, I believe, related to this. So I was pretty shocked when he shared this update, and it's true. I'll link to it, and this is what they're recommending. And obviously we have our very strong at Cloud Posse opinions on this, and then I'm sure some of you do too. So I'd like to hear your feedback on it. So yeah, let me read it from the original source here. And so managing stateful systems via container orchestration. So they've currently updated it now to, they recommend caution when managing stateful systems via container orchestration platforms, container orchestration platforms such as Kubernetes. Some databases are not built with native support for orchestration. They don't expect a scheduler to kill and relocate them on a different host. Building a highly available service on top of such databases is non-trivial, and we still recommend running them on bare metal host or virtual machine rather than force fit them into a container orchestration platform. So I don't know if they wrote this to be controversial and provoke conversation, but I certainly accept the challenge.
Not only that,
man, it sounds like they're just up for a fight. So.
What's new there? People have been saying for years, don't run your Postgres database in a container or whatever, And I mean, there are services out there that have done the work on making it so you can have a, production ready database running on top of a container orchestration system, So I don't really see what even is new there.
Well, yeah, there's definitely nothing new. And it's been a concern held by especially older, more traditional enterprises for some time. These are companies often who are a little bit weary of it because they only recently made the transition from bare metal into virtualization with VMware, had a whole bunch of grief around that, misconfigured VMware, poor performance, yada, yada, yada. And now they're saying that, now people are trying to say that they got to go to Kubernetes, and, there's a lot of fear around that. What I don't like about this is that, that it plays into this FUD that's been going around for a long time. And I don't think that it's merited anymore, especially now, this is just a very short summary of what they're giving an example, like, because the database doesn't like to be killed and relocated on a new host. That might just be for literary effect and not really a great example. But this is also a perfect example of why Kubernetes is the right way to do this. And there are so many ways you can control when your containers get killed, how they get killed, where they're running, their resources, how they get restarted. Their performance characteristics, all those things. So in this post here, I answered it this morning, just kind of off the cuff, everything that came to mind on how you can prevent that from happening. So first and foremost, if there is a managed service for it, just do it, use it. Don't even question this. I'm not saying that you should use Kubernetes instead of RDS, right? You should use RDS if it meets your requirements and that works. That's always what we recommend. But if that doesn't meet your requirements for whatever reason that is, hopefully it's not political, then here are some considerations. First, there was a great post that we talked about last week that summarizes a lot of this stuff. And it's the most common mistakes when using Kubernetes. These are, the mistakes learned the hard way. And once you've been doing this for a while, these are all gonna be easily recognizable. One of those is to set, one of those recommendations for services like a database where you need a guaranteed quality of service is a simple little trick where you just set the requested memory to the memory limit, and then that pod is guaranteed to be the least eligible for eviction or have the highest priority on that node for those resources. Now, the other thing one can set is the pod disruption budget that limits, of course, how aggressive Kubernetes is going to be in rescheduling it, subject to whatever policy you set with the pod disruption budget. The other thing is using things like stateful sets. This is so you can emulate kind of the behavior that was happening in the traditional bare metal VM world, where you had named nodes and you can control the life cycle of them very well. And if that's still not enough, you can dedicate node pools to these. Again, we're still using Kubernetes concepts. And I wouldn't say these are trivial, but I wouldn't say they're non-trivial either. I would just say these are things as a Kubernetes operator that should be top of mind when deciding on how to architect anything to run on Kubernetes. So their point is that you should still go back to running or consider running this on bare metal and virtualization, to which I feel very strongly that it's misunderstanding what Kubernetes gives, and it's actually a framework for cloud automation. It's a way to consistently describe how something should behave in a clustered environment that maybe was never intended even to run inside a cluster. But because the primitives are there, you have the ability to write controllers, you have the ability to codify that business logic for how it should run in that environment. Versus what we've been dealing with for the last 20 years are a different kind of Rube Goldberg apparatus. Don't get me wrong, Kubernetes in many degrees is a Rube Goldberg apparatus. It's just one that all of our Rube Goldberg apparatuses kind of begin to look the same, versus in the past, everyone's Rube Goldberg apparatus with Chef, Puppet, Salt, Ansible all looked different. And now I don't think we should be supporting or condoning going a step back. It's like the dark ages of cloud computing. So any retorts to my retorts, or any additional context or things you guys would like to add?
I think one of the things I resonate strongest with is, use the right tool for the job. If you're not going to use a hammer to screw in a screw. For example, I run Claire. Claire needs a Postgres database. If that Postgres database gets blown away, guess what Claire's going to do? It's going to go and fetch all that stuff and just load it up again. So it's like, I would never spend $250 a month or whatever running an RDS database for Claire, because there's no point. Yeah. But if you have a mission critical database, absolutely, yeah, like something like RDS is AWS has done the work on making sure that that is as performant and stable and durable as possible, and you need to have a reason to not use that. But then there are ways to, do production-ready databases in Kubernetes. There's Vitess, there's KubeDB, there's, most of the database Helm charts have, high availability modes. Like, you can run the Postgres Helm chart with read replicas, and would I run a, mission critical database using it? Probably not, but it's there.
Well, it's like, are you going to invest in building the tooling outside? So we're talking like fresh start. We need to run Postgres database. RDS is not an option for for XYZ reasons. Should we invest in building all this tooling using some other configuration management, or should we just double down on the platform we're already using, which is Kubernetes? Now, I'm not saying that if your organization has never touched Kubernetes, you're not using Kubernetes, you shouldn't suddenly start using Kubernetes just because you want to run a database in this context. This is more, I think, speaking to people who have already selected to use a container management platform like Kubernetes. And should they now decide, well, we now need to build up this whole new competency outside of Kubernetes for how to manage a database? I don't know if that's any better. All right. So we have another 15 minutes left or so on today's call. We've had a lot of talking points related to other announcements and things like that. I'm sure some of you might have some questions we can get answered. Are there some any questions lingering out there that haven't been posted in the office hours channel yet?
Yes.
All right.
This is Mike. Oh. A conversation came up at on our team call today, and it was about, why do we need NAT gateways in AWS? Why not just flip all the instances to a quote, public subnet or subnets backed by these internet gateways? Do you guys see any objections to kind of flipping the switch? And a little background, we went digging through our AWS bill recently and saw
Those
a
suckers
ton.
are expensive.
Yeah. So it seems like all of the traffic, it just adds up really quick. And not only just going out to the internet, but if we're pulling stuff from S3 and restoring a database or doing a database backup and pushing it to S3, when it's on that NAT, we're getting those charges.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
No, that's a good point. I'll share another link that I wrote up earlier this year. It kind of addresses it as well, but to address your specific point, yeah. For all of you that don't know, NAT gateways are ridiculously expensive for what they do.
No.
All right. and if
sorry about that, folks.
That's all right.
Yes,
and if
he's
you're
right.
running
Our company spends $1,000 a month just for NAT data transfers for one service.
Yeah, easily. And if you use AWS Control Tower, Amazon's ATM machine on demand, they basically provision, tons of NAT gateways and lots of availability zones in every account that you do it, and it adds up quickly. Yeah, so it's easy to spend thousands of dollars on NAT gateways that are not even pushing a single byte of traffic. And then, as soon as you start moving the traffic, then it's what you guys say here. So a few considerations. Also, like what Andrew was saying earlier. First, the generic best practices, yes, run everything inside of a private VPC. Use NAT gateways because they're highly available. Run one NAT gateway in every availability zone. Associate elastic IPs with them. Yada yada yada. And these are the generic best practices, disregarding any consideration for cost. We're just talking architecture, availability, design stuff. Now, sometimes the best practice is, how do we spend the least amount of money? And then there are a bunch of other considerations you can make. So one of the easiest things you can do that we do, like if you use our Cloud Posse VPC modules, we have the option of enabling NAT instances as opposed to NAT gateways. And NAT instances, you can run very small NAT instances. And so long as you're not pushing gigabits of traffic, you're going to be totally okay with that. They're not going to recover and auto scale like the NAT gateways are, but chances are in a lot of your smaller environments, you don't need anything like that. So that's the first thing. The next thing you mentioned is traffic to S3. So what you're going to want to do there is set up endpoints, VPC endpoints, so that your traffic to S3 go over that, and then you're not paying the transit costs on that. And then lastly is, can you just run these things in a public subnet, use security groups, and be done with it? Yeah, you can, I guess. It's going to raise a lot of red flags if you're going to go through audits. Any security folks that are going to come in there are going to point this out. It's going to be one of these, it's going to be the first thing everyone points at as the wrong thing without taking into consideration all these other reasons of why it was done. So
yeah, our company's been grappling with this very issue this past week, actually, believe it or not. This is what our DevOps team has been furiously working on. We had NAT transfer costs of around $10,000 a month. We got it down to $1,000 a month. And the reason why is because we're transferring petabytes of video streaming data between multiple AZs in AWS.
Yeah.
And we are still working on a solution. we looked at that public approach, but our company requires CJIS compliance, if anybody knows what that is. No, so CJIS stands for Criminal Justice Information Systems Compliance. So we are a threat detection and security analytics company. We look at video feeds from security cameras to identify objects and detect threats. In order to do that, we need access to some certain data sets from the United States government and from the Department of Justice that it has very, very stringent security requirements. The result of this.
This is what you're using to train the data?
We use some of their stuff for training, some of it for reporting crimes and threats for soft targets like airports, football stadiums, that kind of stuff. And we also sometimes, if there's a warrant out for somebody, we will use facial recognition to find somebody.
Yeah.
So it's
my gut is that since you even mentioned the word compliance, it's a non-starter to go
exactly.
the other route.
It's a total non-starter for us. But then the problem, the issue that this raises for us then is, what do we do? Because we're still stuck on this NAT issue. And the way that we've solved it is we're now just operating in one AZ.
Yeah, so reduce the interzone transit.
That's why our NAT went from 10,000 to 1,000 a month.
Oh, okay. And you have looked at have you also looked at the VPC endpoints for S3?
Doesn't pass compliance.
Doesn't pass, really?
On a pen test, it totally failed.
Huh, why is that? Do you know off the top of your head?
My DevOps team to get you those details.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting if you can share that later, because
all I know is that it failed within the first 5 minutes of a pen test. Somebody was basically able to, I don't know the details, but somebody was able to route through and access our database. So
this sounds like a problem that I kind of ran into at a company a while ago, dealing with video. We had a problem at Google where they bill through their load balancers for every byte coming in. And since it was coming in, I ended up talking to F5. Wasn't able to get it through while I was there, but they kind of build the F5 elastic load balance. They build virtual load balancers with a big IP, and you can and they can hook into multiple subnets. Like you can have it sit across multiple. I believe you can have it sit across multiple VPCs, and it acts as the gateway. And I believe they can cover compliance since big IP tends to be, or F5 tends to run with a lot of government companies, and it would probably be your NAT gateway, and you might be able to get reduced costs. I don't know, but that seems to be like if you're doing serious amounts.
Except for the $10,000 a month,
I was gonna say there's no way F5 is the cheapest guy in the block.
I remember I looked at. I don't know what the cost would be for the volume you're doing. I remember they still sold perpetual licenses for around, $200,000 to $300,000 for a perpetual license at a fairly high throughput in the order of gigabits.
So our throughput is around 10 petabytes a day.
What's the bandwidth on that?
It varies all over the place. Because of the video streams that we have to deal with we are at the mercy of the client sites that have the security cameras. We are a cloud-based analytics solution. So we take a video feed in and then we analyze it in the cloud. So
one other consideration is instead of running clusters that span zones, run clusters in each zone. So you still have the same availability more or less. But avoid the cross-zone transfer.
That's exactly what we're doing right now.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
It's we sit behind an AWS gateway with load balancers behind each AZ, and then we link through each subnet. So we actually have it kind of almost, if you were to draw lines, it looks a little bit like a pyramid setup where we have we have a gateway, load balancer, subnets, load balancers for each AZ, and then that's how we sort of, at a high level at least, set things up.
Yeah. So Mark,
that's one horrible idea. AWS private links out to colos like Equinix. Exactly, because then you'd basically just be egressing over AWS private links, which are a lot cheaper for data transfer And if you have ingress points that you can get closer to your customers, you may be able to get higher speed ingress to AWS using something like Equinix's, I think they're like Cloud Fabric or whatever they do.
That sounds like a very good idea. I'm not sure if my dev team has looked at that. My DevOps team has looked at that.
I just don't suggest it because it involves a lot of physical hardware and it can be really, you have to enjoy doing, probably setting up your own networking gear at the colos.
That's our secret sauce that makes our company work. Actually, we have fully proprietary systems so that we have achieved a hardware agnostic setup with our clients. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like it would be up our alley to actually look into that. The question is it feasible and will it survive compliance testing?
Well, private link it's basically, it directly peers into your VPC is the point. It's for enterprises that are trying to bridge into the cloud and need to secure their private data centers over and can't use VPN because it's not performant enough.
Are you referring to not private link, but direct connect?
Oh yeah, direct connect, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
And that takes like a month to set up because you have to go and contact the direct connect to like vendors, and then that's always fun.
Yeah,
so you can provision
looked into that.
bandwidth through that.
Yeah, we have looked into that, and we actually do have some direct connect set up already. But it's on a per client basis depending on what the situation is on site.
Yeah. So Mark, to your point, I think that's what we were going to end up doing, moving a lot of our infrastructure around into the same AZ to avoid most of those costs. But then it came up like, oh, well, what do we need NATs at all for? But to your point, Eric, it's more of like a security audit standpoint. And, you know, again, not best practice, but yeah.
Yeah.
I think the thing from Eric that's important to mention or to reiterate is that using NAT instances in your dev and test and stage environments, like your non-production environments, is totally legit. It might cause some downtime, but it will save you a bunch of money. And that's what I mean, I've run into that problem before where I had my client go, why the hell is my AWS bill $500 extra this month? And then you bump down to NAT instances and you don't have that issue.
Yeah, precisely. All right. Well, we're at the end of the hour here, so I'm gonna start to wrap things up.
I did have one more thing if you want.
Yeah, let's cover.
I posted a link to a Terraform blog post about HashiCorp is officially taking on the VS Code extension.
Oh yeah, that is a good announcement.
Which is fantastic because it's always kind of sucked ever since they moved it to 0.12. It's never really worked that great.
Yeah.
I've been doing most of my Terraform work in IntelliJ because the support's been a lot better.
I just switched over to VS Code, and it's funny. One of the guys who's in the CP Slack is actually he was the one who originally wrote the language server for Terraform. Yeah. And they basically, it sounds like they forked his work or copied some of it to create a more stable, like non-experimental version. And I'm seeing
he has now transferred. He has now transferred his work to them.
Ah, okay.
Transferred ownership. Mike, you're talking about Mikhail Olenfalk?
Oh no. So there's him who was the original creator of the Terraform extension, but then the language server, like the VS Code way of like interpreting the language constantly and basically giving you intelligent views into your code, like being able to understand where documentation is and stuff like that. That was built by somebody who I've seen in the Cloud Posse Slack before. And they've basically used some of that combined with what you were talking about, which was the original extension, to try and make the 0.12 compliant version of the extension. And it's really good to see, because that was definitely a confusing thing when I first switched over to VS Code, was Terraform support kind of sucked. But yeah, getting better.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I can't remember his name.
It's a JS something, Julius, or I don't know how to say it. I'm gonna totally botch it, so I'm gonna stop.
Yeah. Cool. Good announcement there. So last closing thoughts here.
The launch is still on as of right now. It's in 1 hour. It's a huge momentous occasion. It has been 40 years since astronauts have flown on a new platform, and it's been 9 years since astronauts have launched from US soil. So check it out.
Yeah, thanks for this is Andrew's talking about SpaceX. They're doing the first manned rocket mission to the space station, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's happening in 1 hour, huh?
In 1 hour. Well, the launch window opens in an hour. It's been raining cats and dogs, so they're not sure yet, but
so it might get delayed or postponed.
Right.
Yeah. My buddy's growing white hairs over it because he wrote the flight critical software for that launch.
Oof. Ouch. Yeah. Yeah, that would give me chills. That would give me that kind of software. You can't iterate on it the way we do everything else.
Exactly.
No
I'll
pressure.
post there's a YouTube stream from NASA. I'll post the.
Yeah, post that. Post that in office hours. We're gonna watch that. Cool.
Remind me, the best class I ever took, maybe 531, Life and Death Computing.
Really? That was a class?
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
It was about writing software for medical equipment, and we researched the Therac 25 incident. Had to read a white paper on that one.
Oh, that sounds really interesting.
Wow. That is interesting.
Was that software written in C?
Yeah, it was the hardware on a actual, I'm not even sure if it was C. It was a long time ago I read this, but basically Radiation Machine killed a bunch of people because of a software safety system glitch.
Oof.
Yeah.
Not a good way to go. All right. All right. Well, we reached
On
the end
that
of the
note-
hour here. That wraps things up. Remember to register for our weekly office hours. If you haven't already, go to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/office hours. If you want to book a session with me, you can always head over to cloudposse.com/quiz, and I look forward to talking with you. Thanks, everyone, for sharing. We always learn so much about everything going on in the world. I certainly did today. A recording of this will be posted to the Office Hours channel, as well as syndicated to our podcast. If you go to podcast.cloudposse.com, you can subscribe to it however you listen to podcasts. See you guys, same place, same time.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks. See you.
Thanks, guys.
Fine.